Hi folks. The following video is from an article that I wrote several years ago for Family History Monthly, and it's about the origins of the 12 days of Christmas. I know it's a little bit late, but we are still in the 12 days. But the reason for that is I lost my mother at the end of November, um, and then just after the funeral, got a really, really bad cold. So the whole of the Christmas period has been really out as far as work is concerned. But as we are still in the 12 days of Christmas, I thought you might like this video. It's just a look at why there are the 12 days of Christmas and all various Christmas and 12-day celebrations that there have been for many hundreds of years. I hope you enjoy. In our modern society, where commerce is king, Christmas starts after Halloween, builds up into a crescendo of hysterical money spending, and culminates in an orgiastic climax of partying, drinking, and overeating. Nowadays, the festival is effectively over after Boxing Day, and most of us are encouraged to hurry back to work on the 27th of December. The Yuletide festival was very different for our distant ancestors. For our medieval ancestors, it started at midnight on Christmas morning and lasted until Twelfth Night, the night beginning on the 5th of January, with 12th day being January the 6th. The only custom remaining from these 12 days is the practice of keeping our decorations up until the 6th of January, when with relief we pull down the drooping tinsel, sweep away the thick pile of Christmas tree needles. Very few of us, I am sure, know why we do this, and neither do we know much about the 12 days, apart from that strange and rather irritating Christmas carol. In order to understand the 12 days, we have to go back to centuries immediately following Christ's lifetime, when the Christian Church was attempting to establish a nativity festival, and the idea of celebrating Christ's birth was not actually a popular one until the end of the 1st century. But nobody knew on what day he had been born, and it was not until the year 336 that the 25th of December was chosen. This was partly because of a belief that the Annunciation, and therefore Christ's conception, was on the 25th of March, and therefore his birth must have taken place 9 months later. But it was also related to a pagan festival that was already in place involving sun worship, and the Christian Son of God intermingled with the belief in a pagan sun god. The date of the sun's rebirth, according to this belief, was the 25th of December. This was, at the time, the date of the winter solstice, a major feast day in the Roman Empire. In those days, the 17th to 23rd of December were also celebrated as the Feast of Saturnalia, when social order was overturned and servants could make the rules. Holly, a symbol of the god Saturn, was used for decoration, and the festival also included the making and giving of presents. These traditions were incorporated into the later Christian festival. The next decision to be made was the hour of Christ's birth, and this was established as midnight on the morning of the 25th, when a Mass was held, hence Christ's Mass, which over time became Christmas. The other name for this period, Yuletide, stems from the old pagan festival of fire and light, known as Yule in England and Scandinavia. The Druids used to light a Yule log, which was kept burning for the 12 days of the winter solstice. This tradition was still being practiced in medieval times, and the log would be carried into the house on Christmas Eve, decorated with greenery and ribbons, lit with the end of last year's log, and kept burning until January the 5th. There are still remnants of this tradition today. In the pagan festival, the 12 nights following the winter solstice represented the 12 signs of the zodiac. However, in the 4th century, the 6th of January came to be the date that the 3 wise men came to visit the infant Jesus, and so this became the Feast of the Epiphany. The French Church proclaimed the period between the 2 dates to be sacred, and so began the celebration of the 12 days of Christmas. Several Christian feast festivals became incorporated into this period, including St. Stephen's Day on the 26th, the Feast of St. John the Apostle on the 27th, and the Feast of the Holy Innocents on the 28th. Whether by design or not, by entwining Christian festivals with pagan ones, the Church successfully increased the popularity of its own celebrations. By the Middle Ages, this mix of pagan and Christian rites had become well established and was preceded by 4 weeks of fasting, known as Advent. The fasting on Christmas Eve was particularly strict, and no meat, eggs or cheese were eaten on this day. Ironically, today's Advent traditions, including calendars crammed with chocolate, bear little relation to those of this medieval period of abstinence. Indigestion was no doubt as much a part of Christmas then as it is now, as banqueting, for the rich at least, started on Christmas Day and was repeated on many of the days up until Twelfth Night. After 4 weeks of fasting, this must have come as a shock to the system. Goose, swan, or venison might be eaten, and in 1289 the Bishop of Hereford was reported to have presented a boar's head to his guests, which became standard fare for the elite. And for most people, Christmas Day would start with attendance at Christ's Mass at dawn. The congregation would hold lighted tapers while Christ's genealogy was sung. Afterwards, they would go home and begin their first big meal of the season. In some areas, depending on whether your local nobility were of a generous leaning or not, the rich were expected to keep an open house for the locals. The food might have included a precursor of today's mince pie, which was made with real meat, fruit and spices. Christmas pudding was originally a dish of porridge, currants and dried fruit, eaten on Christmas Eve after the day's fast. It seems to be the case that there was no tradition of gift-giving on the day itself, and certainly no Father Christmas or Christmas tree, both of which became a part of Christmas festivities during Victorian times. The day was all about food and community, whereas today we focus more on family gatherings. Over time, entertainments became part of the merrymaking, and by the early 15th century, landowners were employing theatrical troupes, and musicians, mummers' plays and dances were performed in some villages. By Tudor times, amusements might also include jesters and acrobats. Some parishioners would pool together funds to hire their own players, or even put on their own plays in the village church. On the 26th of December, the church distributed the money from the alms boxes to the poor of the parish, which is why we call this Boxing Day. Today's tradition of giving small gifts and tips to delivery workers stems from this practice. You probably know that the 1st of January did not officially become the start of the new year until 1751. But surprising though it may seem, New Year celebrations did take place on this day, following an old Roman tradition. It is on this day that we find evidence of the giving and receiving of gifts among the upper classes and from master to servant. And there is no reason to believe the exchange of gifts did not happen in the lower classes as well. It is this tradition that is believed to be the forerunner of the modern-day Christmas present. It was at New Year that the wassail would be heard. The word comes from the Saxon Waes, Hael, and means be well. In Saxon times, the lord of the manor would shout, Waes Hael, to his household, and they would reply, drink Hael, meaning drink well and be healthy. By the Middle Ages, it had become a tradition to toast each other in this way, usually with mulled ale, cider, or wine. By 1600, many commoners had begun to take the wassail bowl from house to house, singing as they went, a practice that Shakespeare probably was involved in, and which has survived in the modern Christmas carol singing from door to door. There was also a ceremony whereby apple trees would be sprinkled with the wassail to ensure a good harvest in the coming year. Twelfth Night signalled the end of the Christmas holiday, but was itself a time of religious services and feast-making. It began with a dramatic church service and ended with what was probably the most lavish feast of the year, for the upper classes and royalty at least. And there were many entertainments and much merrymaking. Twelfth Night cake was an essential part of the festivities and often contained a pea and a bean, whoever finding them becoming king and queen for the night. One of the most interesting aspects of the Twelfth Night period was a tradition that had developed from the Roman Saturnalia festival. In Roman times, the Lord of Misrule represented the god Saturn, and one member of the community would be appointed to take on this role. This practice lasted well into the Middle Ages and the Tudor periods, particularly in larger households, universities, and law schools. A mock ruler would be chosen for the 12 days who would be in a position of authority and in charge of entertainments. The chosen one would then appoint guards and followers, and they would dress themselves up in the most colourful garbs, cover themselves with ribbons and lace, and march to the church. All social niceties and behaviours could be mocked and inverted at this time, leading to a period of chaos. A record of the written appointment of one particular Lord of Misrule for the household of the Right Worshipful Richard Evelyn reads, Imprimis, I give free leave to Owen Flood, my trumpeter, gentleman, to be Lord of Misrule for all good orders during the 12 days. And also I give free leave to the said Owen Flood to command all and every person or persons whatsoever, as well as servants as others, to be at his command, whensoever he shall sound his trumpet or music, and to do him good service, as though I were present myself. At their perils I give full power and authority to his lordship to break up all locks, bolts, bars, doors, and latches, and to fling up all doors out of hinges, to come at those who presume to disobey his lordship's commands. God save the king. It's not difficult to imagine the riotous and often scandalous events that were no doubt caused and presided over by the Lord of Misrule. Their antics often caused church officials, particularly Puritans, some serious concern, and there were regular calls to ban the tradition. However, many abbeys and cathedrals had their own version from the 10th century, known as the boy bishop, who presided on the day before the Feast of the Holy Innocents until the end of the following day. As well as being in charge of services, he sometimes would lead a procession that collected money from wealthy households and spectators, which would then be used for parish funds. On the 7th of January, all merrymaking finally came to an end. In the countryside, preparations would begin for ploughing the fields, and the first Monday after Epiphany was known as Plough Monday. So Christmas was very different for our ancestors, and not as we imagine because it was more strongly religious than today. In fact, the church allowed so many secular entertainments and pre Christian traditions to become part of the nativity celebrations that perhaps feasting, drinking, and general carousing was even more of a feature of Christmas than it is today. The following verse is taken from a long poem by George Wither, written in the early 17th century. Now all our neighbours' chimneys smoke, and Christmas blocks are burning. Their ovens they with baked meat choke, and all their spits are turning. Without the door let sorrow lie, and if the cold it hap to die, we'll bury it in a Christmas pie, and evermore be merry. Which rather sums up the light-hearted aspects of Christmas, and perhaps reminds us that despite the fact that it is predominantly a Christian festival, we like to enjoy a midwinter festival that brightens up the dark days of winter, just like our pagan forebears did. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I'm now losing my voice, but I do hope that you have had a lovely Christmas period, and don't forget to celebrate Twelfth Night as our ancestors did. And was Hael, and a very, very happy new year to you all. Bye for now.